Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for what is just an ultimate intellectual journey. We're tackling a topic that really forces you to question, well, everything you thought you knew about life, death, and the brain. Near-death experiences or NDEs.
Yeah, and you sent over an incredible stack of sources. I mean, we're talking clinical facts, these deeply personal accounts, and then the theoretical battles raging over what it all means.
Exactly. So our mission today is pretty clear. We're here to unpack the central paradox of all this research.
And it's a huge paradox. We have to ask the question, how can you have complex, structured, and vividly recalled consciousness?
When the brain is offline.
Right. When the organ that we assume creates consciousness appears, by every clinical measure we have, to be completely silent.
That's the whole thing, isn't it? Before we get into some of the wilder stories, let's just set the stage. This isn't some rare fringe thing.
Not at all. The prevalence is significant. I mean, sources looking at patient data, especially in consciousness studies, show that roughly 10 to 20% of cardiac arrest survivors report having an NDE.
10 to 20%. That's a massive number.
It really is. It's a huge population, and it demands serious study.
Okay, so let's unpack this with some, hard clinical facts. For most of that group, their experience happened during clinical death. And science is pretty clear on how fast the brain shuts down.
Oh, it's very clear. The clinical sources, like what you see in the resuscitation journal, they detail a very, very tight timeline.
What are we talking? Seconds?
Seconds after the heart stops, blood flow to the brain is gone. Measurable, organized electrical activity, the kind you need for thought, for memory, it typically stops within maybe 10 to 20 seconds, tops.
So the lights are off.
According to the materialist model, yes, the lights are off.
So then where is the experience coming from? That's the immediate conflict. You have thousands of people describing these detailed, coherent stories that supposedly happen after that 20-second window.
Exactly. And these aren't just, flashes of light. NDEs have a narrative, a sequence. And the most disruptive part, the thing that pushes this beyond just a feeling, is the accurate perception of events.
Events happening in the room around their body.
Yes, that's the core of it.
So when we talk about what's in these experiences, what are the common themes that keep popping up, regardless of someone's background or culture?
It's remarkably consistent across the globe. You have the classic out-of-body experience, the OBE, where they see their own physical body from above.
Looking down on the scene.
Looking down. They often report meeting deceased relatives, a feeling of just profound peace, moving through a tunnel towards a brilliant light, and then the life review.
The whole life flashing before your eyes.
But more like a total instantaneous playback of everything you've ever done.
And as you said, the key is the objective part. Seeing or hearing things they couldn't possibly have known.
That's what moves it into the realm of perceptual science. It's why researchers have tried to actually measure it, like in the AWARE study.
Okay, let's touch on that because you mentioned it and it is pivotal. What was the AWARE study actually trying to do to test that perception?
Well, Dr. Sam Parnia's AWARE study was the largest of its kind. They set up systems in hospitals specifically to test the OBE claim.
How?
They put these shelves up high in resuscitation rooms with specific symbols on them, images that you could only see from a vantage point near the ceiling.
So the idea was if a patient has an OBE, and if it's a real shift in consciousness, they should be able to tell you what was on the shelf.
Precisely. And while, getting that clear, verified hit on the targets proved elusive in that big cohort, the study still documented several cases of clear, verifiable awareness during periods of zero detectable brain activity on the EEG.
So even without the target, they got awareness during clinical silence.
And that's what fundamentally challenges the current model.
This is the perfect point to bring in the case, the one that's like a lightning rod for this whole debate. You can't do a deep dive on NDEs without talking about the Pam Reynolds case from 1991.
Oh, absolutely. The Pam Reynolds case is often called the gold standard.
Why? What makes it so special?
It's because of the extreme controlled clinical conditions. She had this massive brain aneurysm, and the surgery required, it required a state called hypothermic cardiac arrest.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that actually mean for her body?
It means they intentionally stopped her heart. They lowered her body temperature way down to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit and drained the blood from her head. During this time, her EEG, which measures brain activity, it was completely flat.
A flat line?
Zero.
Yeah.
Clinically, her brain was metabolically incapable of supporting any kind of conscious thought.
And they blocked all her senses too, right?
Hermetically sealed them. Her eyes were taped shut. And crucially, her ears were plugged with these click speakers, blasting sound at high volume to monitor her brainstem. She should have been completely isolated.
But she wakes up and reports an NDE that is just, well, astonishingly accurate. What were the verifiable details she gave them?
She described floating above the operating table, and from there, she accurately described the specific surgical tools they were using. She even recounted conversations the staff were having while her brain was supposedly off.
And there's one detail that always gets cited, the one that's just so hard to explain away. It has to do with a sound.
The bone saw. Reynolds described what the saw they used to open her skull looked like. She said it looked like an electric toothbrush. But more than that, she described its high-pitched sound.
Which shouldn't have been possible.
It shouldn't have been. Her ears were totally saturated with that loud clicking noise from the monitors. She should never have been able to pick out an external sound on top of that.
Now, I have to play the skeptic here. It's necessary. Couldn't her brain, just before it flatlined, have registered a flash of information, the sight and sound of the saw, and then just played it back later as a memory?
That is the essential question. It's what the scientific community asks. And yes, delayed recall is a possibility. But the strength of her case is the combination of everything. The flat EEG, the sensory blocking, and the fact that she reported multiple events.
Right, it wasn't just one thing.
No. The saw, the tools, the conversations, it all happened over a period of minutes while the brain was silent. A delayed memory of a 10-second moment doesn't really account for that level of complex, accurate observation over time.
That's a great point. It would have to be a hallucination that was perfectly mirroring reality in real time.
Which is not how hallucinations typically work.
Okay, this brings us perfectly to the next step. Let's give full weight to the other side. Let's look at the purely scientific neurological explanations that try to rationalize all this.
The theories that try to put it all back inside the box.
Yeah.
Or inside the skull.
Exactly.
Okay, so these are robust attempts to explain it through physiology. The first big one is oxygen deprivation, or anoxia.
And how does a lack of oxygen create the tunnel and the feeling of peace?
Well, when the brain is starved of oxygen, the visual cortex is one of the first things to be affected. The peripheral vision goes first, which can directly create that classic tunnel vision effect, with a point of light at the end.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that chaotic state can also trigger a huge release of chemicals that cause euphoria. So you get the tunnel and the good feeling.
But if we apply the Pam Reynolds test, anoxia causes chaos. It doesn't usually create a crystal clear, accurate recording of external reality.
That's the divergence, exactly. Anoxic hallucinations are typically abstract, subjective, internal. They aren't expected to be perfectly matched to verifiable events in an operating room.
All right, what's next? What about specific parts of the brain?
That leads to the temporal lobe activity theory. And this is a big one because the temporal lobes handle memory and self-awareness. We know from research that if you electrically stimulate that area, you can induce some wild sensations.
Like what?
Feelings of transcendence, time distortion, and, critically, the distinct sensation of having an out-of-body experience.
So maybe the trauma of cardiac arrest just randomly zaps the temporal lobe, creating the OBE.
That's the theory. Then you have the neurotransmitter flood.
The chemical explanation.
Right. The brain is in crisis. It's shutting down. So it might trigger this massive protective release of chemicals, maybe even compounds like DMT, that could generate the vivid emotional content of the NDE. The light, the peace, the life review.
And the last one is sort of a catch-all for the brain just falling apart.
It's called the disinhibition of the dying brain. Basically, the brain's filtering systems fail. The inhibitory signals go first. This causes a cascade of disorganized, unfiltered neural firing. The brain just tries to make sense of this chaos by creating a story.
So these four theories are strong because they keep it all physical, they're biological. But their weakness, as we keep coming back to, is that objective accuracy, the Pam Reynolds problem.
Yes. That struggle is exactly why the NDE phenomenon opens the door to these alternative, non-materialist models of consciousness.
Which raises that huge philosophical question. What if the brain doesn't create consciousness? What if it's more like a receiver?
Like a radio picking up a signal. I love that analogy.
So let's go there. Let's explore these other theories, the ones that see consciousness as, well, primary.
If you follow that receiver model, the main idea is that consciousness exists independently from the brain. The brain is just a highly sophisticated tuning device.
So what's happening during an NDE then?
When the brain shuts down, the filter fails. But instead of causing chaos, this allows the consciousness, the signal, to operate without its physical limits. It can access a broader reality that would account for the clarity because consciousness itself is still whole, even if its receiver is broken.
You also mentioned ideas that touch on some pretty heady physics, non-local consciousness. What's the connection there?
Well, this comes from quantum mechanics, where particles can be linked across vast distances. The idea is that maybe awareness isn't confined to our skulls. Maybe it's a fundamental field-like quality of the universe itself.
So during an NDE, your consciousness isn't traveling, it's just accessing the information field that it's already part of. That's a really elegant solution to the Pam Reynolds problem, I have to say. But what's the big critique of it?
The main critique is that it's non-falsifiable, at least right now. We can't design an experiment to prove that consciousness exists without a brain. It relies on inference from these anomalies, not on repeatable tests.
So it's a compelling story, but not yet provable science.
Exactly. And that tension is what makes this field so fascinating and, frankly, so frustrating. But it's important to stress this isn't just philosophical hand-waving. There's a real academic canon here.
Right.
Researchers use standardized tools now, like the Grayson NDE scale. It's not just a questionnaire. It's a detailed 16-item scale that lets them quantify the depth of the experience, the sense of unity, the paranormal aspects, so they can actually compare data globally.
So it moves from just being a story to being a data point.
Precisely. And we talked about the AWARE study, but you have to mention Dr. Pim van Lommel's work. His study in The Lancet was prospective.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they set up the study before any of the patients had a cardiac arrest. That kind of forward-looking design adds a huge amount of scientific rigor. It makes his findings on verifiable NDEs really hard to just dismiss.
So when we put all these sources together, where does that leave us? We started with the hard data, 10–20% prevalence, a brain that shuts down in 20 seconds. And we put that against these structured, verifiable experiences like Pam Reynolds seeing the bone saw.
And we found that the standard biological models, anoxia, temporal lobe stimulation, they're pretty good at explaining the subjective feelings, the hallucinations, but they really struggle to account for the objective, accurate perception in the strongest cases.
Which leaves us at this ultimate frontier, right? The relationship between the mind and, well, matter.
The sources really force us to confront these fundamental questions. Is consciousness just a product of brain chemistry that ends when the brain dies? Or is it something non-local that the brain just tunes into? This research demands we try to find an answer.
It really does.
It forces us to admit that our neat materialist model of what the mind is and how it relates to the universe is, well, it's incomplete.
So building on that really disruptive idea that the brain might be a receiver and not a creator, consider this for a moment. If our awareness is constantly accessing some broader, non-local field, and our brain is just filtering it down for daily life, what does that mean for things like intuition, or that sudden shared grief you feel when a distant loved one passes away? Could an NDE just be the filter being switched off completely for a moment, giving us a temporary glimpse into the true non-local nature of our own awareness? That's something to mull over.